Let's take a look at Zscaler private access application segmentation. We have a number of application segments defined, my ADFS server, my CentOS server, my certificate servers, things like that. I'm going to specifically look at my Apache server. My Apache server here is defined as a web application. It's running on port 80 and 443. It's advertised for browser-based access. We've got inspection enabled, and it's also enabled for isolation. And so segmentation means that I can make a policy-based decision. This is only available to be accessed on port 80 and 443. If I wanted to allow SSH to it, I create a new segment for SSH, and I can write policy to allow or deny access on that. So the policy then comes in to make decisions on under what conditions and what criteria is the user allowed to access it. And so I have three very distinct rules here for my Apache server. The first rule says I need to have a SAML attribute that says it's managed, and that is managed attribute is coming from Azure AD. And an is managed device says it's Azure AD joined, it says Azure AD managed. I can write a compliance policy for it. And obviously in this case, I'm coming from a Mac, and therefore it is not, in this case, a managed device. So I'm saying it needs to be managed if I'm going to access it from the client connector or through a web browser when I'm using browser-based access. If that rule doesn't fire because those conditions aren't true, then it's going to come down to CBI, which is the isolation. And I say, okay, well, I'm going to allow the cloud browser to access it because we're going to make decisions on how to or when to send the user into cloud browser isolation. And then my final rule for Apache says, well, if it's neither of those two rules, I specifically want to block access. So what we're saying is the user needs to come from a managed device, either using Zscaler Client Connector or browser isolation, or they need to be coming through browser-based access from a managed device. So let's take a look at the isolation policy. The isolation policy says, well, if you're coming from a managed device, if this is managed device attribute is true and you're using a web browser, then we'll just allow you direct access, in which case it's browser-based access. The second rule says, if you're using the Apache application and you're coming from a web browser, then we're going to isolate you. And so these two top-down say basically you have to be a managed device to access the application directly. Otherwise, we're going to isolate you. And that goes hand in hand with the access policy that says we're going to allow you to access it directly if you're a managed device. Otherwise, we're going to isolate you. Otherwise, we're going to block you. So let's take a look at how that looks in practice. So from my unmanaged device here, I'm running Zscaler Client Connector and Zscaler Private Access is running. And if I open apache.welshgeek.net, I'm going to get access denied. And that is aligned with this rule that says I'm going to block access because the user is neither coming from a managed device nor are they using cloud browser isolation. I haven't been sent into isolation yet. If I come across to managed device here, let's open this up. We're running Zscaler Client Connector. We know it's a managed device because we can check those SAML attributes, SP, do a logon process, and we can see here that is managed is true, is compliant is true, is known is true. So if we open the browser and we go to apache.welshgeek.net, we're able to access the website directly straight through Zscaler Private Access with Zscaler Client Connector. So if we come in here and let's open Zscaler, and we'll turn off Zscaler Private Access to synthesize the user being off network on this device. We can close that down. If we open and we go to Apache, what we'll expect to happen now is we'll go through browser-based access. Again, those SAML attributes will be reviewed, and then we'll give access to the application. So we'll see the redirects happen. The user is redirected to log in via Azure AD, Now we're redirected to an HTTPS website, and this is the browser-based access to that application. So we're able to access the application. We'll see we've been redirected to HTTPS. We can look at these certificates, and it's coming directly from Zscaler. If we come across now to my client machine here, let's open this. We'll turn off Zscaler private access here. We'll see now when we access apache.welshgeek.net, what's going to happen is the user is sent into isolation. So now we went through that authentication flow. The authentication identified the device as unmanaged, and so it triggered that it was going through a browser, and therefore we should isolate the user. So 4 different experiences based on the device: denied access from an unmanaged device, isolated access from an unmanaged device, direct access with Zscaler Client Connector from the managed device, and direct browser-based access through the managed device, all through the Zscaler private access policy and aligning that with our segmentation policy. Let's take a look at the diagnostics. We'll be able to see all of these in the diagnostics page. We can see here was the user hitting that CBI policy, and we see here that we're using cloud browser client type. This is the user accessing through the web browser. So this is the managed device. We can see the user metadata, and we'll see the SAML attributes here that says is managed is true. That's what the policy was applied on for that unmanaged device. This was client connector. This is that managed device being allowed through. Again, we can see the SAML attributes is true. And then the block for the MAC going to it direct would have been prevented because of the client forwarding policy saying preventing access to that application segment as well.